Hello, everybody. David Woolwich here, New View Safety Coach. Welcome to another episode of the Shut Up David series. The longer I do this channel and the more people I get to speak to, the more I realize how great people are all over the world and how generous they are with their time and their knowledge and their stories, coming to share them with me and share them with all the listeners and watchers. It's I've been thinking about this over the past couple of weeks. It's really humbling, and a shout out to all the people who have agreed to come on and do a talk. Some amazing people from all over the world. And speaking of amazing people, today we've got another one for you. Surprise, surprise. Thrilled to have Gordon Walsh joining us on the podcast. Gordon is the principal consultant within the Safety Centre of Excellence at Energy Safety Canada. Again, my teeth falling out again, stumbling over my words there. In this vital role, Gordon facilitates relationships between organizations and individuals dedicated to enhancing safety practices across the oil and gas industries in Canada. Gordon provides well-informed recommendations on safety resources, training programs, research initiatives, and intervention strategies aimed at bolstering workplace safety. And this is where we start talking about aspects like HOP and human factors and new view safety. This is where they come into play. His work is instrumental in driving continuous improvement within this critical sector. Gordon's passion for his work and commitment to collaboration make him an invaluable asset. We are privileged to have him on the show today to discuss safety leadership, emerging best practices, and how we can collectively elevate workplace safety to new heights. So please welcome to the stage, Gordon Walsh. Gordon, thank you so much for coming onto the show and talking to us.
David, it's my pleasure to be here with you, and thanks for the opportunity to have a chat. Looking forward to it.
No worries at all. Thank you. Thank you for coming on. Like I said, like I said in my intro there, it's always humbling. You've got so many great people all over the world doing such great things within these areas. And, when people such as yourself agree to come on the show and talk about your experiences, your values, what you've seen, what works, what doesn't work, it's always very humbling for me. So thank you for agreeing to come on. Why don't we start with a quick intro to yourself for people who don't know you, because obviously this goes out all over the world, and a quick intro to how you got into safety, and where you are currently at the moment, your role at the moment.
You bet. So I'll probably, I think the best thing to do is probably take you back in my early working days. And I grew up in the east coast of Canada, and I grew up in a blue collar family. Used to get their hands dirty and being out on job sites, and had an older brother who was a bricklayer, and did quite a bit of work with him, and summer work, and working on homes, mostly residential brickwork. And I did lots of farm work and a bit of logging and chainsaw work, that type of activity. So I was no stranger to physical labor, and also pretty hazardous environments. When I left high school, I went right into construction excavation work, and I worked in that for a period of about 6 years, in trucking and excavation, lots of trench work and around heavy equipment and excavators and loaders and trucks and all those things. All the fun stuff. Really enjoyed that work, and it was good work. I enjoyed it, learned lots. And an opportunity came to go work at a local coal mine that just had opened when I was in my mid-20s, and they were looking for new people to fill those spaces of underground miners, people that had experience either mining or equipment operation. So I signed on with the company at Westray Coal in 1991, in the summer of 1991. And I worked there for a period of 9 months underground as a beltman, and then an underground operator on the various pieces of equipment as underground miner. And as some people will know in the world, Westray is a historic event that took place. The Westray mine disaster happened on May 9th, 1992. And I was on my days off at that time. And 26 miners were killed. The mine closed. It never opened again. There were criminal charges laid after OH&S charges were laid. The OH&S charges were dropped, and to make way for the criminal charges, and so the saga begun afterwards. I worked on the rescue recovery operations for 5 days after the Westray mine disaster, and as I said, 26 guys that I worked with and had the opportunity to get to know some of them pretty well, lost their life in that incident. I was a pretty young guy, and I had a sobering reality of what it is to work in a high risk industry and to be exposed to something that can go, when it goes catastrophically wrong, it is absolutely unbelievable, right? It's like a nuclear bomb went off underground, what it looked like when we went in the mine. So from that day, my life changed quite dramatically, and my worldview on health and safety and really what I was going to do for my career going forward, it really made me think about what direction I was going to take. And my wife and I moved to Alberta at that time after the mine had closed, and we moved on away to start a new life in Western Canada. And I worked a couple of different jobs, a lot of machinery and working around that type of, but I always had this in the back of my mind that I had a story to tell, and I had something that many others didn't have, and that was a perspective on health and safety that was, was very, very sobering, but it was also, it teaches you something that you can't describe or you can't learn in a classroom. And so I decided to go and do my occupational health and safety certificate program through the University of Alberta at the time. And I was not a scholarly person, so that was a struggle to get through some of those courses. But having done that, then when I finished, I got into working in health and safety. And I thought I would just get a regular safety job like most other people out there. But at the time, the trucking industry here, and I had some interest in that, of course, and understanding the trucking industry was looking for a facilitator and a person to work with companies and health and safety. And so I was lucky enough to get on with those folks. And that was a good 21 years ago now, and going into 22 years ago, and worked with the trucking for a period, a year and a half. And then I moved into manufacturing, another safety association, for 5.5 years. And I've been in my current role with the company Energy Safety Canada. We were formerly Enform, and the last 6 years, I guess it is now, 6-7 years, we've been Energy Safety Canada, and I've worked in multiple roles in the auditing side, in the training side. I used to manage the training department, and then moved into a principal consultant role 4.5 years ago. And so I've never really had a safety job, is what I say. I've done a lot of instruction at the front of the room. I've met with a lot of companies. I've done lots of audits and all those kinds of interactions, and worked with a lot of companies on everything from, just trying to help them understand how to move forward with their safety programs and doing support type of activities, and lots of presentations at conferences and those kinds of things as well. I do. Awesome. That's the nuts and bolts of it, David.
That's awesome, thank you. And just for people who don't understand as well, what is Energy Safety Canada? Is it a government organization? Is it a private organization? What is it?
Yeah, in Alberta, here in Alberta, Canada, we have I think it's 13 what we call funded safety associations, and Energy Safety Canada is one of them. So we have the oil and gas industry, which makes up a very, very large group of companies and different types of work, from oil sands to conventional oil and gas operations. And those companies agree to have a safety association represent them. So they partially fund our organization. So we work directly for industry. And it's our job. It's our job to try to progress safety forward. With the help of industry and in collaborating with industry. And we also collaborate directly with government as well to ensure that we're We're keeping good lines of communications open. So when government sees things happening in industry, they have a trusted partner in making sure that industry can can understand from people that they trust and and that they work with. And then we can bring that message forward, and we can do a lot of very focused efforts, on whatever we see collaboratively that needs changing or improving.
Gotcha. So you're like the middle man in between private industry and government, there with a focus for improving industry generally, and in your particular area it's oil and gas within Canada. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're using the term energy more often now because we're even over oil and gas, because a lot of the companies that we serve are now branching out into other energy sectors. They're starting to look at wind and renewables and hydrogen. There's lots of activity now around small nuclear reactors that they're looking at placing in remote areas to manage operations, create electricity for operations. So we're really, even our conference that we do in Banff, we term it as the energy conference for that purpose, that we're trying to be more inclusive. And truly, we, in my role in the Safety Center of Excellence within Energy Safety Canada, part of my mandate is to create connections and networking with like-minded associations, and to really look at globally around health and safety to say how are people successful in Australia or Denmark or Norway or California, and what we're trying to do is create those relationships around the world so that we can collaborate and gain access to some of these effective strategies that people are implementing.
Yeah, right. And that's important, because you can't just be in a siloed area, can you? You can't improve if you're only looking at yourself. But that, and what you said then about observing around the world is what works in different places, brings me on quite nicely to was going to be my next question, which is, what is the context of energy services within Canada? What are we talking about for people who don't understand what kind of context that is? What might a typical day in the life of a worker, on one of these oil rigs or gas fields, look like? Sure.
And it's in Western Canada, it's a massive part of our economy. It's a huge part of our economy. Canada is, I think, the fourth largest oil producer in the world. I think we're about the fifth in the world for gas.
Wow.
We have tremendous operations, and that have been embedded in our economy and our culture here in Western Canada for decades. So we have second, third generation people who have been involved in the oil and gas industry. And so essentially there's people that are going out there in exploration, and they're finding where there's pockets of oil and gas. And from there's test drilling that is done, and that can be in very remote areas. It's done all year round. So we have extreme weather conditions that our workforce are required to manage. And that can go from, plus 40 in the summer in southern Alberta to minus 50 plus in northern Canada. And these guys are the workforce, the men and women that do these jobs every day. It's amazing what they do 365 days a year, in all weather conditions. And they're away from home. They live in camps often. They work 14 days on and maybe 10 days off, or 7 days off, but they're often away from their family. They're working 12-hour days, and as I said, in all conditions. So you have drilling, and then when they bring those holes onto production, whether it's gas or oil, and there's when you look at a map of Alberta and the gas lines that are under our soil here, everything from 4-foot lines moving massive amounts of crude right straight down to the United States, straight south of us, or slightly on an angle, different. Cushing, Oklahoma, I think is the biggest central point where there's a collection point, and then that gets further moved to the Gulf Coast. We just completed a giant pipeline going from Alberta across to British Columbia through the mountains. It's just amazing the work that our pipeline crews have done for our LNG. So we'll be moving, trillions of feet of gas, of natural gas, which will then be converted to LNG, liquefied natural gas, and will be cooled and put on giant tankers in the coast of BC, and they'll move all over the world. And we're a little behind on, behind Australia and behind the United States as far as our delivery of that product. It's a bit of a sore point in the oil and gas industry. We have a lot of regulatory hurdles that have been very challenging to get our products to market. So this is so that has caused quite a bit of difficulty, and but I think it's starting to open up more. There's been huge investment and interest in northeastern British Columbia, which is the province that borders Alberta, and northwestern Alberta, and there's a huge field of natural gas that will serve the world for years to come, decades to come. And that will, and so we have a tremendous operations. If you fly over northern Alberta and into BC, you can see all the markings of the activities that are in conventional oil and gas operations that you see along the landscape. And then when you go up into northern Alberta, into Fort McMurray and into that area, that's where you get into our oil sands. And our oil sands operations they're fairly shallow operations. There is some that are still traditional mining, not too many. And that's where they're literally with a shovel and truck. And these are big autonomous haul trucks now, for the most part. They're converting those over. But those facilities, it's amazing when you go up there and you see the operations, and that the oil that is embedded in the sand. It's actually sand, a couple of 100 feet of overburden, and then you have this oil laden sand, and that's taken and it's mixed with chemicals and steam and run through a pipe system, and then it's broken down into its different petroleum commodities and shipped on the pipelines to the refineries. And it's a fascinating operation. The equipment is huge. And the production levels. So that's one kind of operation at Fort McMurray, and the newer one is the SAGD operations, where they drill two simultaneous drills parallel to each other, and they run those into the geology underground, and they inject steam and a chemical mixture underground and heat up that formation, and then that drains the oil into the other drill canal, and then they bring that to surface. And one operation, I don't need to use the name, but they produce with SAGD upwards to 240,000 barrels a day. So that gives you some idea of the scope of the amount of oil and gas that is produced in Alberta and BC.
That's huge.
Saskatchewan.
That's huge. It's not like when I think of oil producing countries or gas producing countries, and maybe it's just because I've not been familiar. I'm not informed like what I am now, but I always think of obviously the Middle East and America, and Canada's never really come up on my radar with regards to those types of things. But these are big numbers now you're talking, isn't it? And they're in. I remember when we caught up last week, people, just so you're aware, Gordon and I caught up last week to have a quick chat to see what we wanted to talk about today. And Gordon was telling me about some of the extreme weather that affects obviously Canada's can be a very cold place, and like you mentioned, 40 degrees in the summer down to minus 50, and I can't even wrap my head around what minus 50 would even begin to be like. I'm from the north of England, and I think it got down to, in some, sometimes during summer we might be close to double digit cold, minus 9, minus 10, but minus 50 is a complete different level of hostile environment, isn't it? That's brutal. That's life and death within a matter of hours, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, when you look at the operations this past winter here in 2024, here in Calgary, so we're 7 hour by vehicle south of Fort McMurray, and we had the weather drop to minus 43 for a couple of days. And I can tell you, just being in that weather for a couple of days, you do not want to go outside. Nobody wants to go outside. And it's cold. And to your point, it's extremely dangerous. You do not want to be outside without the appropriate clothing and coverage, because we're talking minutes of exposure, and you will get frostbite. It's not if, it's guaranteed. So it's and then when you look at the guys in the north and the men and women that work in the oil sands, they were operating in minus 50 for. One gentleman told me up at the conference, they were for 9 days straight, they were below that minus 45 to minus 53 thereabouts. And when you think about hydraulics and you think about steel and grease and trying to dig the earth to move product, and you got conveyor belts, miles of conveyor belts, and you're trying to have steam so that you're injecting and keeping everything moving, and so they have a skill set that is just beyond imaginable, what they've learned over the years and how they've managed to keep those operations going. They don't shut down like we don't. We're here in the south. We don't hear them say, "Oh, there's no operations today. The buses aren't running today in Fort McMurray." That's not the way it works. Whether it's snowstorms or whatever it is, their operations. We had some severe fires. It's about 10 years ago now, 8 to 10 years ago, I guess it is, the big fires in Fort McMurray. And they had to shut in some operations at that time. And it was only within less than 2 weeks in Eastern Canada, they were already having shortages of gasoline and diesel. So so
the reserves aren't that big then.
The reserves aren't that big, and it happens. Even though I think we produce about 4.5 million barrels a day here in Alberta, in total with Alberta, Saskatchewan, and BC, I think that number is correct. I was reading here a while back. The production is huge, but when that shuts down, you can imagine there's a knock-on effect that hits right across the United States and Canada, all who we supply to. So it's an industry we need. It's not going away anytime soon. We have to manage it properly. And the one thing that's wonderful about this industry is that we have tremendously smart people that have been involved, and they work with the universities and they work with the academics to figure out the best technology to do this in the best way. And I can say, really giving a shout out to the Indigenous community and the First Nations communities that work alongside our oil and gas industries, so that we're doing the best job we can, and still develop those commodities that we need in order for us to keep the lights on and stay warm. So there's great partnership between our Indigenous communities, and in the last number of years, they're taking a huge role in being the operators and partnering with the main operators of these commodities, and it's really helping their communities so that they get the full benefit of the product, the stuff that's coming out of their soil on their ground.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. And we've got a similar situation here in Australia as well, with obviously Indigenous Aboriginals here on the land, and huge mining, especially here in Western Australia as well. There needs to be that relationship, that partnership between the original owners of the land and the people who want to come in and essentially and remove parts of it and sell it for a profit. How does that impact the land, the quality of the land? What's going to happen after these, or these organizations come and essentially extract a huge proportion of the land around? What happens to the land then afterwards? What kind of rehabilitation process you're going through? What kind of recompense happens to the Indigenous populations who have allowed this activity to take place? It's a huge part of contemporary resource industry these days, especially here in WA as well. So that's another thing that we share there with regards to our weather. We spoke about this the other week. Our weather here in WA, it can get ridiculously high, up to the 50s and things like that, but I would imagine it's easier to manage high temperatures as opposed to extremely low temperatures. As you said, then, when you start getting down to -40, -50, nothing wants to work. Everything wants to just stop working and just jam up, and water doesn't want to flow. Air acts differently. Metal,
absolutely.
Everything just. And it's the same but different. For the heat, metal expands, liquids expand, stuff like that. But it generally keeps on moving. Whereas down at those temperatures, that's crazy. Why don't we have a look? Because Energy Safety Canada, and particularly yourself, with your conference in Banff, and as you mentioned at the beginning, looking around the world for contemporary safety methodologies and bringing, deciding whether they would be of benefit to the energy sector in Canada, and then essentially educating organizations and businesses within Canada to say, look, this is what's working elsewhere in the world. Is that something that would work here in Canada? How long has this been going on, and what drove you towards looking at things like HOP?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's about 4.5 years for me now, coming up on 5 years in this role. And as I said, I was the manager of our training division, and we have quite a large productive training group. We do all the oil and gas training right across Canada. We're a recognized provider of many, many courses that our industry uses. This is when I say we serve industry, we're also blessed with having our board of directors and our senior leadership team are people that are very very connected and committed to progressing forward with health and safety. It's the environment, with our Indigenous relations, and all to support our people so that we're not injuring and having and having fatalities in the industry. So those folks, when I say that, they're smart, wise people. They've been in this business for 40 years, many of them, and they said, we need to do what some of the successful companies are doing, but we need to do it more globally as the industry. Rather than one or two of the main operators like Chevron or Imperial and Exxon, they were kind of two of the leaders at that time. Rather than, let's learn from them, let's have conversations with them, and let's see what we can do as a safety association to share the knowledge. And so that was how the conversation started. I was put into the position, and then I started a community of practice at that time, where I started seeking out folks from around the world to talk to. Kim Bancroft in Brisbane was my first conversation. Jeff Lith in British Columbia was another one. Brent Sutton was another one. Andrea Baker was another one. These were all different folks that I talked to around the world and told them what we were doing. And then I started bringing people on monthly to speak on my speaker series, and I started making these connections. Chevron was gracious enough to give us everything they were doing. They invited us in for some training with them to to show us what was going on in there. Imperial immediately stepped up, and we started developing a relationship with Imperial. Shell and Suncor and Syncrude and ConocoPhillips and people, everyone started just to have more conversation, and some of the other smaller groups as well. And then some of the big agencies outside of oil and gas that actually build some of these big plants like Leadcore Construction or Bird Construction or PCL Construction. These are folks that are all embedded into this HOP methodology. And what that also took us, David, was it opened the door. I'm fairly shameless when it comes to calling people. If I think there's somebody knows something that can help us out, then I'm just going to try to make contact with them. And so Dr. Matt Hallowell was one of those people at the University of Colorado, and he was managing, and still is. He's the executive director for the Construction Safety Research Alliance, and they were doing a ton of work on that real, the sharp end, the real frontline worker. How do we protect that frontline worker, and how do we understand how to do better in this space? So Energy Safety Canada joined up with their group, and we became one of the companies that signed on. They now have 101 or 102 companies. And the wonderful part of this is a great model. And Matt was talking to some folks from Australia when he was at our conference speaking. And they're really going to be collaborating and sharing with the folks in Australia to look at a similar model. Like the cat out of the bag, but they're all having some discussions. But what it is it's a group of 100 companies, and people are signing on for research projects. I'm on the Safety Culture Project. I was on another one, Precursors to Serious Injury, before this one. You get 30 safety folks in the room. Everybody's motivated by the same thing. It's not about your title. It's not about what you've done. It's about doing teamwork together, led by academics that have tremendous field experience and understanding of injury and how these things occur, and bringing those questions forward by the group. So they go through a committee of taking in information, taking in requests for research, and then the committee chooses what that research will be. So there's some great work has been done by them, and Energy Safety Canada is really leveraging that work as well. And so that one of the things when we started moving the HOP message forward in our community was some of the people that are more process safety driven and in high risk environments. One of their concerns was, where does HOP talk about critical risk? Where does HOP talk about critical risk management? Or are we just to expect that the workers are the experts at the front line, and they're going to make the great decisions, and they're going to make the right decisions every time, and all of those things? And there was a few of us internally that were of the same mindset. We said, we can never lose sight of the hazards people deal with every day. When it's minus 50 and you're working with hot steam and it's under pressure, and it's in the middle of the night, and you're trying to do a task, and you're frustrated, and you've got clothes, and there's steam around you, and you don't have the proper things for your hands for dexterity, your safety glasses or your shields are steaming up. These are the real conditions that people deal with, and they can only stay outside for a certain amount of time. They got to get warm, and they got to cycle in and cycle out, and these are very dynamic environments. And you can have the philosophy of safety, but you also have to be able to take that philosophy and put that into real-time action. And people have to understand that hazard is always with them. It's those actions as they take along that path, how they manage that risk, that associated risk. And that's where we're really trying to be. I'm a non-academic, full stop. I'm trying to understand what I read and what I hear and what I take forward. And I'm also trying to be mindful of my own days of doing work that was really difficult with not the best tools and in difficult situations. So this is what we try to help our companies understand, is that always know that the hazard is with you. If you work at heights, there's always the potential to fall. So yes. You need to have, when you hear Todd Conklin talk about, you have to build capacity in that system. then we can't have somebody slip off the edge. If you're working with explosive environments, or with we're working on something right now on noxious fumes and things that are asphyxiants. When you're in these, the hazard is always with you. And it's going to follow you. It's like when you're hiking on a mountain. Or if you're boating. Humans were never designed to swim for many, many miles. There's a few out there that can do it, but most of us can't. So we try to take precautions should we have a problem on a boat, right?
Yeah.
And so these are the things that are, and we're in, we're 4 years into this game now. Internally, I call it a game, but it's what we've termed it is our safety evolution. And we chose that word very carefully because it's not about the old saying, throwing out the baby with the bathwater. It's not about stopping traditional safety one procedures and processes and audits and check back. It's not about that. It's not about stopping training. It's not about forgetting about competency. It's about how you overlay these things together. And when we talk about doing safety differently, we talk about it looking at it through the lens of the 5 principles of HOP. And knowing that we've made great gains over 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years, but we're still killing people with some of the most basic interactions. Somebody falls and strikes their head. Someone takes a machine apart and they don't understand where the energy is going to be when you remove a bolt or you remove a pin and somebody gets a crushing injury. Someone is struck by a piece of equipment because they're in close proximity and there's no warning system on that machine to stop that machine. Or the person is in the line of fire when someone opens a valve, or they thought something was locked out when it wasn't locked out. These are real. They happen every day, and we have thousands of interactions in our industry every day where there is the potential for someone to be hurt.
Yes, definitely. And I really like that, because what you're talking about there, you're talking about proactive education, you're talking about bringing industry new ways of approaching things and new ways of doing things and new ways of seeing things without that initial bias, which a lot of people have when I talk to them about HOP as well, which is, oh, well, if we're doing that, that means we can't do this. And it's like, no, that's not, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about moderation between the two. It's
absolutely
almost, as you framed it, I really liked how you framed it, actually, using HOP, safety differently, as the lens through which you see everything else, as opposed to everything else as being, these checklists, your audits, your risk assessments, all these things have to be done, and they need to be done, and you have to have them, not just for compliance, but also to be aware of your critical risks. But view that through the lens of HOP. And that's the difficult part that I find with some people when I talk to them about this. Is like, I've been brought up with safety, not me personally, they'll say this in not so many words. I've been brought up with safety being, I tick this box, I make sure that I tell my people this, and they have to read that. These are very simplistic terms, but you get what I'm saying, that they're very mechanistic, they're very concrete, they're very real. And then when you start talking to them about, okay, well, let's overlay everything with a lens through which we look, some people find that really quite difficult. But that's a journey for them, and that's a journey for organizations like yourself as well, to actually start this education process and going, look, we're talking about principles, we're not talking about solid rules, we're talking about philosophy of safety in effect, as opposed to the mechanistic, concrete aspects of safety, which is making sure that we have all our legislation and we have a safety management system, whatever that be. There are two separate things there, but I wanted to touch on, you've got this proactive education part, where you're talking about developing these groups as well. There's 100 and odd companies involved in them. You're basically creating communities of sharing and developing together, which is amazing. And I hope it does come to Australia, because we really need something like this as well. There's been pockets of people and organizations, and even to a degree myself, this channel as well. It's all about trying to share what people have done, see where it worked, see where it didn't work, and talk about ways forward. And there's another aspect that you work on, isn't there, in in Energy Safety Canada, which we touched on last week, which is the creative sentencing.
Yes,
which is another fascinating area. And could you give people a bit of an oversight as what you mean when you say creative sentencing?
Yeah, absolutely. So here in Alberta and a few provinces in Canada, we have that term creative sentencing in Alberta, where industry safety associations like ourselves, Energy Safety Canada, we collaborate with the provincial government authorities. So when an incident occurs in our industry that falls under the oil and gas industry, we have many different industry codes, everything from trucking to oil sands to downhole drilling to servicing. There's lots of different industry codes. We have something like 21 different industry codes, which is essentially different types of work that feed into the overall industry. And when something happens in industry that a company is going to be charged for that, and the company in their own analysis and with the cooperation of the OH&S investigative team that act on behalf of the people for the government of Alberta, they look at it as an opportunity where they could have something produced that could be a learning opportunity for not just our own industry, but other industries that feed into it or support our industries. And this is the type of work that I've been involved in for many years now, and we're in the middle of working on 2 creative sentences right now, and we have a third one that was just awarded to us. And what you end up doing is the prosecutor and the investigative team work with the defense counsel for the company. They agree on the conditions of that creative sentence and how much money will go to that project. Energy Safety Canada or an organization like ours will be asked to put a proposal forward. We will get a short summary of the event, what it was, and we will collaborate internally with our key people inside our organization to put together that proposal, where we believe that we can make a difference, where we think that by producing something, some educational product, not necessarily a course, but it could be an animated video, it could be a guidance document of some sort that we can share for free across the network and across other industries. Our goal is then, and go out and always a part of those creative sentencing is also going out and meeting the public face to face and going to multiple places within Alberta, usually 3 or 4 outward summits that we will do, where we bring the project to life for people in the room, so they can hear about where it started and what the goal of this effort is. And usually they'll hear from somebody in the government at that time, and they'll hear from somebody in the company. These are horribly impactful things that happen within an organization. Good companies have fatalities too. There's lots of good people that they didn't set out in the morning to have something go wrong inside their company and kill one of their neighbors or have a horrific event. And so I am extremely mindful of this in my past experience of where I started in health and safety at the Westray coal mine. Literally going to 9 funerals in the run of a week. And when you sit there and meet people's children and you meet their wives for the first time, these are the things that are hugely impactful on people's lives. And their lives will never be the same. When someone gets critically injured or someone dies in the workplace, their families are changed forever. Their workmates are changed forever. So for us, this is our way of really trying to pull those things together so that we can share back with the public something that is useful, something that is impactful, and something that is respectful of the dead, of the people that were involved, and to try to always do better, to try to give people a different look. Human and organizational performance is that different look. We're trying to, it's not different for nuclear, it's not different for the US Navy or for the airlines, but it is different for our organizations. And we're trying to bring just a new view into that for people, and we're trying to bring that to life through these creative sentences. So.
Gotcha. And when we first touched on this last week, when we were having a chat, which we should have recorded, to be honest with you, because we covered so much ground last week, didn't we, when we were having a chat. These creative sentences, we have something similar, well, very similar here in Australia, and we call them enforceable undertakings. So essentially, something's happened, an organization, for whatever reason, and it could be a good organization, like you said, has been found liable to some degree, which would have carried a penalty of some magnitude. And instead of just the organization paying that penalty over to the court system or paying it over to the judicial system, they reallocate that funding and go, okay, well, what can we do to improve safety within the context of this organization for the community? And, that could include subcontractors, contractors as well, and all that kind of stuff. But it's a way of redistributing penalty money for the betterment of the community as a whole, which is essentially what you were saying, wasn't it, for your creative sentencing as well? And I personally think it's an amazing initiative. Whoever came up with it and whoever signed it off, I mean, you're going to have these penalties anyway. Why not try and turn something that's already bad, that's already happened, into something positive and something to help, hopefully, to stop this kind of thing, whatever it was, from happening again in the future.
Absolutely.
But I love the way that you're actually using Hopper's that lens for the improvement as well. How are you finding that lens with organizations?
I think it's really good. We did a creative sentence a couple of years ago, and that was our first dive into it, and it was we'll be able to show it on our website here in a bit, but it was a free offering. It's building capacity to manage pressure. And one of the gentlemen in our office, Robert Waterhouse, it was his thinking that we should, when we looked at this particular fatality on a coiled tubing unit, a gentleman, there was trapped pressure. The person didn't realize it was there. The supervisor didn't realize that pressure was trapped in a line. They were using a test bar to test the BOP on the surface. And when they released that, the test bar struck the individual and killed the person instantly. And it was one of those learnings that when we looked at it through the lens of HOP, we said, wow, this is so much more than just a person having their head in the wrong place at the wrong time, or somebody not understanding which valve was opened or closed. And we took that opportunity to build a 3-part series where the first part was an award-winning video. It's 12 minutes long on the coiled tubing reenactment, an animated video. And it really points out all the things that were missed in the course of the planning and how these folks carried out their work. And it really brings to life the context of why they were doing what they were doing. The second part of that was also just understanding pressure, because people have a very poor understanding of what 5 psi is, as opposed to 125, as opposed to 7,245, which is what the pressure was on, pounds per square inch force in this particular case. And then the third part was we wanted to retell the story through the use of games and bring to life the human and organizational performance principles and error traps and those kinds of things to show. Give people a first-hand view of that. So that's been well received. Many companies have adopted it so that all their field staff take this course for free. It's all online. They can do it at their own pace.
Why don't we have a look at that now?
Yeah, it's. I think when you go into standards and programs here, and you can see where I'm just going to bring this up as a so I can see it a little bit better. Yeah, you can see the human and organizational performance line item there, just right underneath programs. And if you click on that, you can open up, and we have a tremendous amount of information in here, David, that I've assembled with our other fellow co-workers of mine. And we've done lots of speaking with folks that provided us the permissions to use as their resources. And everything we put on here is vetted information. It's links to presentations from our conference in 2023. We'll have 2024 conference up there soon. Yep. We have webinars on demand. We have ExxonMobil provided us with some great resources there. They have a line item there. Really good stuff on supervision and again, videos. These are real videos taken in their operations that anyone can use, have access to. We have lots of articles.
It's free to whoever logs on?
It is. Anybody. You do, just as simple as you open that up, all of these links to articles and posts and, even some hard copy publications. I put some books in there, a lot of the books that I've read or somebody in our office has read. We've put the link on there, podcasts. So there's lots of good stuff there, and videos that we do, and some websites as well. There's some of the companies that are doing good work in this space. We've hosted their website link here, and some of them are from Australia. I think.
I was just going to say, I noticed that Dave Provan's name there in the podcast, and also over here as well somewhere. Here we go. Yep, Dave Provan again, Sydney Decker. Todd,
absolutely.
Conklin, Brent Sutton, a lot of familiar names in the industry, which is great. And these are the people who they're interrogating the information, they're interrogating the research, they're having a look to see how practical it is in the real world, and then they're putting that information out there so that the rest of us can benefit from their work in those industries as well, which is amazing.
It's really good stuff, and it's I always welcome anybody to email me and get in contact with me. My email is Gordon, GORDON .walsh WALSH at EnergySafetyCanada.com, and I welcome anybody if they need a walkthrough here to find some of the things that I've been speaking about, or even to access some of the other things that we're doing, and we're happy to share.
Are you okay if I put your email address in the description below, along with the website? Yeah. Okay, fabulous.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's and we're really we're excited about collaborating and networking with people like Brent Sutton and Jeff Lith and Tony Masera and Dave Provan, and we had the pleasure of having Sydney Decker in Banff this year, and Dave Provan and Brent, and we had Tony Masera last year and Jake Mazalevich talking about human performance, and we've had a lot of great presenters in Banff on these topics, and our education level of our health and safety professionals and practitioners, it's really being raised up, and it's and people are coming on my community of practice that I have one here on June or May 30th. I'm going to have two presenters on. Dr. Jean-Christophe Lecoz from France is going to be on speaking about auditing. That's going to be great, and I think I sent you the link to that, David.
You did. Thank you so much for the invite.
Yeah, and then we're going to have Juliana Blais on, and both Juliana and Jean have just recently presented at the conference in the EHS Congress in Berlin. And Juliana is going to be talking about better ways for internal training to how do you train people with safety internally, but to have it stick so that it doesn't just disappear 2 days after you leave. And
gotcha.
She's a psychologist, a registered psychologist. She's worked 20 years with industry. She's from Brazil, just a fabulous lady with a ton of knowledge. So we're really looking at in their presentations coming up is going to be great. And then we have in, I think it's June 27th on our community of practice, we're going to have Zoe Gully, who is going to be coming on and doing a 2-hour session on causal reasoning methodology for investigations. And this is a space where people are really trying to look beyond a single root cause and moving beyond some of the known methodologies and adding some more flavor to how they do investigations. And as Dr. Todd Conklin and Dr. Nippon Anand, I was lucky enough to take a course from them on the investigation topic. And they really focus on that, the up and out and not down and in, right? The least interesting is the event. It's all the things that fed and led to that event. So that's really what Zoe will be talking about, but from the perspective of logic and what did happen, not what should have happened or what didn't happen, but what did happen. And she'll be going through that causal reasoning methodology. So that'll be very good to tune into as well.
It will be, wouldn't it? And this is one of the fascinating things I find. The longer I'm in safety, the more I realize that safety is such a multifaceted profession. You've got, even with just this that we're talking about then, we're talking about aspects of adult learning, psychological aspects of adult learning, and how to make that information stick. That's part of safety as well. You're talking about efficiency of processes and equipment. That's part of safety. We're talking about how to access information, that's written down on a piece of paper, how to access that information properly, efficiently, and effectively when someone's under time constraints working with critical risk. That's part of safety. There's so many elements to safety now that, people can get into safety and not do the stereotypical work that was expected of them 20, 30, 40 years ago. Specialize in areas of psychology, specialize in areas of adult learning, specialize in areas of ergonomics or human factors as well, and or even the psychology and I suppose biology of how to read information effectively and properly, with regards to usability mapping or document engineering. There's so many great areas, and that's what makes it such a great industry to be in, when you've got so many people around the world who they may not have started out in safety, training and adult education, but they recognize the skill set is valuable and they can bring that to you. And people in organizations like you can go, look, that skill set that industry has or that person has would benefit our organizations, because that's an integral part of safety as a whole. And I think it's wonderful how people are prepared to share and bring this information together with this common cause. And one person I'd like to bring up about, there's a gentleman called Dr. Gary Klein. He's from the East Coast of the United States, and Dr. Klein has been into this business for years and years and years, and he's known as the guru on natural decision making. So he's written 9 or 10 books. He's well-published author. If you look him up, Dr. Gary Klein. And I rang him up one day and set up an appointment to speak with him. And I'm sure I shocked him, because he said, I'm not sure, I don't know much about the oil and gas industry. He said, I'm not sure why you're contacting me. And I said, well, I have a purpose. And to your point, all the things you just listed off, Dr. Klein and a battalion chief with the New York City Fire Department, and I can't think of his name right now, but they collaborated together to have better training for their firefighters. And what they found was they were in a situation at a point in time where they had a lot of gray-haired people, very much like our oil and gas industry, that are getting ready to retire. And they had lots of people that had 2, 3, 5 years in. And what they were realizing in their thoughtfulness was that they were going to lose all this tacit knowledge, all this gained experience. Decades of gained experience was going to be walking out the door.
And we're in exactly the same situation with many industries. We're losing a tremendous amount of our senior knowledge, and new people are not going to be getting that same training or understanding in their as they come into the industry, but they're going to be dealing with infrastructure that will be there for decades. So there's going to be a gap. Yes. And so what I had Dr. Klein speak about was what he called the Shadowbox training model. And this is something that is very interesting.
Shadowbox
training methodology. And he has a website on Shadowbox training. And the whole, to summarize it, what it's really about is surfacing the deep knowledge of a senior experienced person on a topic for other people that are less experienced, so that they kind of jump the queue. They get a viewpoint from a different direction. And how they did that was they would put a scenario up on the board, and they had these fairly junior people work in groups, and they would put a scenario up on the board and say, how would you handle this fire scene? What would you do? And they had to collaborate with their table, and then they would give their explanation of what they would do and why they would do it that way. And after they went around those tables, they would bring in the expert, the 30-year, 35-year battalion chief, and he would say, now, this is how I would do this. And what he would bring to the table is his methodology of how he sees the world, with all that experience that's not just in books or at fire school, but what he learned over decades of actually experiencing those real environments. And then by him recounting his methodology and telling them how he thought about it, why he thought about it that way, and what his model was, then they were again signed to do another scenario. And very quickly they were doing 25 to 30% better than they did on their first scenario. Almost instantly they were making better judgments and better planning. And of course amazing. Now it's amazing. It's amazing stuff. And so this was to have Dr. Klein on was I said, I know you don't know much about oil and gas. You don't need to. You know a lot about training. And he worked for, I think he did his PhD in 1965. So he has some time under his belt. So
that was in the time even before computers, so everything would have been on typewriters, which would have been even harder as well. So
exactly.
Yeah, that's me. I may actually reach out to him and then see whether he's prepared to come on and have a chat. But that's a side issue. But it's amazing, isn't it? I was on a mine site. I'm not going to mention which one it was, and here in WA, and I was talking with one of the senior operators. He'd been there for 30 odd years. He was actually a supervisor, and I was talking to him about some of the inherent hazards. And he goes, look, David, he says, the hazards are all around us here. He said, what I see is our biggest hazard as an organization. I said, no, please tell me. And he goes, the fact that so many of us old timers are going to be leaving in the next 5 years. And there's going to be a dearth of intellectual property knowledge, from people who've actually made the mistakes and had to figure out a way to do them. And he said, there's so many workarounds that have been applied and not necessarily documented as well. It's only up here in people's heads. That's where the knowledge is. And then suddenly you're going to have all this knowledge left. It's going to leave, and you're going to have people who don't understand that. And I said, wow. He said, that is what I see is the biggest hazard. And I thought that was such an enlightening way of looking at it. I mean, this guy's surrounded by, big he said, there's these big chambers, essentially. They're like almost the length of a football field, and material goes on one end. It's compressed with immense pressure. We're talking thousands of psi, thousands of degrees centigrade as well. So we've got huge pressures, huge heat, and then product comes out the other end. And he said, you can read all you want about the standard operating procedures or the swims, the documentation, whatever you want. He said, but I've seen one of those things explode. And it exploded because of a simple mistake that an operator made. He said, and he said to me, I felt like the world was about to end. And I'm like, wow, you can't read about that kind of knowledge and that experience as well. and how that has affected everything that he's done in relation to that particular piece of equipment is because he's had that first-hand knowledge and experience. And if he can't pass that on to other people about how he felt like it was the end of the world and how it was bending, just, he said the metal frame that goes around it, he said it looked like spaghetti. He said it was just, he said he was just moving in ways that metal shouldn't move. And he said the stuff that didn't move, it was just snapping like dry spaghetti. He said it was the most frightening thing he's ever experienced. But he'd experienced it, and he was no longer able to pass it on. Yeah, exactly.
It's a really good point that when you talk about, we have a lot of stuff on our website there too under resources. If you go into the resources one and put it down, we have safety alerts, we have bulletins, we have guidelines and toolkits, and there's all that stuff is free for the taking. There's webinars on demand in there. There's numerous different things. Our companies can build their own reports. They can call us up, and we have quite a data analytics group who put together their reports for them. So there's lots of good stuff. I'll be hosting a one-day event here in June 6th, I think it is, in Nisku, at our facility in Nisku. And what I basically do is just talk about why the oil and gas industry has moved into this area, what's driving us. And what's driving us is we have not reduced our serious incidents and fatalities in roughly a 10-year period. We've done good on the other injuries. We've dropped those 30% over 20 plus years. But we need to manage these high energy events better. And what we're really trying to keep a couple of balls in the air here at the same time, because we have a lot of process safety operations that is real for our plants and areas. And a lot of our industry works with process safety, but we have that human interface. And that's what we're trying to remind people, that if you're depending on a human, as Todd Conklin says, we're highly motivated, but we're just not that dependable at times.
Yeah, exactly.
And for various reasons. And what we're really trying to do is focus on, people understanding those brittle systems, so that one area, one person doesn't make an error and then blow something up, or cause them their, life-changing event. And we're trying to have people think forward in how they're designing work and how they're asking people to go to work and what they're doing. And the question that I will ask the folks on July 6th, when I have them work in groups, I bring up each one of these topics, and then I have them do a group exercise, and where they can discuss it amongst themselves and then report to the whole group. But when we talk about critical risk management, this is the thing when we say is, so if John's the only person that can do this because he's the person with that tacit knowledge, that experience, that understanding, then how brittle is our system? Because one day John's not going to be here, or John's going to be on vacation, or John's going to call in sick, and then that piece of work is going to have to be done. And somebody is now going to, in an ad hoc manner, is going to have to now adapt and try to read something, or try to go talk to John on the phone if they were lucky, but probably not. And they're going to try to do something that must be done at that time. So what we're really asking people to think about, David, is are you doing your work the same way that you've been doing it for the last 10, 15, 20 years? And are you injuring people the same way? Because if we don't change the way we think about the work and that interface between our humans in doing that work with that equipment or that energy, if we're not considering that we need to change the way we do the work, like you and I were talking about in the construction side of things, if we're not willing to put up scaffolding for people and we're asking them to kind of act like monkeys on the side of a wall, then we're not setting them up for success. If we're not, right, we're putting our frontline people in a situation where we're forcing them to adapt in a situation where the cards are stacked against them. It was kind of like me working at Westray coal. When you're working in an underground coal mine, and you're bringing machinery into that mine that has hot pipes on it and hot starters and all those things that are not designed to work underground, and you're walking around in 6 to 8 inches of coal dust, and your ventilation is so bad that you're 25 years old and you feel like you're 70 because you can't get enough air. You're setting yourself up for exactly what happened. It only took 9 months at Westray Coal. Other mines, it took longer. But as most people will tell you, if you're in that environment, it's not if you're going to have a fire underground, it's when.
When, exactly.
Right? Yeah. It's when. And so these are the kind of things that we're trying to bring forward with, the whole perspective of human and organizational performance, is to say, people are going to make errors. There's no two ways about that. They're in dynamic environments. We have truckloads of fuel going up and down the road here. There's 1,000 a day if there's one, all days of the year, in snowstorms, in bad road conditions, in the middle of the night. We have people out moving in motor vehicles, and that's still one of our, I think it's still our highest killer of our workforce in North America in the oil and gas industry. So
ironically, it is here as well in Australia, in mobile pedestrian interface. That's one of our mobile plant and pedestrian interface. That's still one of our biggest injury and fatality causes as well.
Yeah, and it's one of those things is, steel always wins against bone, right? There's no, you're just not going to win. You're not going to win that battle. And unfortunately, we've seen that over and over. And another one that, we're working on another creative sentence right now on asphyxiation. There was 3 out of 4 workers were asphyxiated from nitrogen gas about 4 years ago on a job site. And we've put together, and I think it's on our website there now, the link is on there to the video of the reenactment of what occurred. And people can stroll around or give me an email, and I'll make sure you get the link to it. But it's a fabulous video. Not because it's certainly not nice of what it talks about.
Let's see if we can find it while we're talking about it.
Yeah, maybe go under standards and I think it is under resources. I think it is under confined space. Yeah, there you go. Go under the confined space. Yeah, and scroll up a little bit. These are videos that we did from another creative sentence, confined space training video series, and this one here with the gentleman in the red coveralls, confined space and asphyxiant resources. This was from the triple fatality, and this is all free to share, and I can tell you that this is
open it up in a different page, but
yeah, absolutely,
I can confirm that it does work, and it is here.
Yeah, and this is a powerful story of 3 out of 4 workers dying and not understanding that they were working for multiple years with the hazard of nitrogen, but they had no understanding of how deadly nitrogen is, where you're only 1 or 2 breaths and you literally knock down. It's not like, I don't feel good with carbon monoxide or some other asphyxiant. This happens almost instantaneously, where the person will lose their life, and it's not if, it's a guarantee.
So that's definitely a Todd Conklin thing of were we good or were we lucky? And
exactly.
this organization has been lucky for a very long time, but that doesn't mean that they were safe.
And that's, when we get back to that whole idea, like, Tony Masera's work on critical steps, that's one thing. Tony might be a great guy to have on. He's written a couple of great books, and if you need his contact, I'm happy to give you his contact. But Tony's very, very practical guy when it comes to, he wrote a great book called Critical Steps, he and 2 other authors. And we really keyed in on that, on Tony's work, because it talks about 3 things. If you have a gun and when we talk about critical steps, when you pull the trigger of that gun, you better know where the bullet's going, because what's going to happen is there's going to be an immediate effect it's going to be irreversible, and it's going to be intolerable if it hits something that it is not intended to hit. So keeping those three things in mind, it's immediate, it's irreversible, and the outcome would be intolerable. When we talk about critical steps, this is something that frontline people get when we talk about, if you are going to do this task and your very next move of opening that valve, do you know for certain what is going to occur? Or before you go and undo those bolts, do you know for certain what is going to occur? And these are things that when we talk about those single point failures, it's about building that capacity in the system so we don't put people in those situations, but we also understand when we are doing this critical type of work that if it goes bad, it's not going to be a sore shoulder, it's not going to be a scraped hand, or right, it's going to be a life-ending or an intolerable event. And and working, for instance, on lockout tagout, when I worked at Westray Coal, we thought we locked out the system, and all we did was interrupt the power. And we were doing a maintenance job, and while we were on the belt started with us on it. And I dove off to the clear, and my brother-in-law got his leg caught between the framework of the conveyor belt system and the belt, and resulting in a severe life-changing injury. So these are knowing these things before they happen, understanding critical steps, and what does critical work mean, right? What does a critical control mean? And so this is another area where we're really trying to bring some daylight for people, so they get out there and do an inventory of what they're doing and understand where people are interfacing with this work and with that energy, and understand that, when one thing triggers something, how is this going to affect somebody else, right? Or another person.
Have you guys looked at a Bowtie methodology for critical risk and critical controls?
We do have Robert Waterhouse he's done a ton of the work on the Bowtie, and we actually have a community of practice for process safety as well, which is really good. So we have a few of them, and Rob also has a Bowtie exercise in our building capacity to manage pressure course. So when people get in there and dig around, they're going to find that as well. And
awesome.
Yeah. So
it's one of those frameworks, one of them approaches, which it ticks all the boxes for communication purposes, because it's such a visual thing as well, and people can see exactly, okay, what are the critical risks associated with this top event that we don't want to happen, and what do we have in place? The barriers are in place. The skill set that comes with it, which I'm sure you're aware of, and be covered in lots of those, is to be very judicious in relation to the barriers you put in place. And you want them to be physical barriers. You don't want them to be just documentation. You don't want the admin side. You want the actual physical control side of things. But I've worked with a few clients on them, and it's great. Even if they don't have any barriers, even if they don't have any physical barriers, at least they then know they don't have any physical barriers in place, and they can, it's knowledge. They go, okay, well, we're only relying on paperwork to stop this particular event from happening, which is a critical event. Is that enough?
Exactly. It's that understanding, David, like the deeper thought process and understanding in your planning. Well planned, well resourced, well managed will equal in a successful outcome, and that successful outcome will be safe work. And we look at some of the critical lifts that are done in the Fort McMurray environments. These are massive plants, huge plants. These cranes might have 200, 300, 400 feet of boom on, and they're lifting very, very heavy objects up into the massive vessels, tons and tons of steel. The interesting thing about this is when they plan those critical lifts, this is not something that's planned by two guys in 5 minutes or 15 minutes.
Yes.
This is a big piece of work. And why did they do that? Because the outcome, if it fails, is intolerable.
Yes.
right? And so for their, and not that they, not that they can't have trouble or something, completely unexpected would happen, but ultimately their plan that they have in place is thought about, and every aspect of it with a group of people in that planning, and then learning from every lift and learning from these things. And I think that's the other thing that we're really pushing with our industry, because we're not very good at it. We don't share when we have incidents that others can learn from. It's really difficult to get the industry to share across companies.
Right,
and
okay.
Only since we've really been engaging the companies with human and organizational performance are we starting to see some of those walls come down. And with our communities of practice, we're starting to see people talk more and say,
That's
hey,
awesome.
we didn't get this right, and this could happen in your environment as well. And yes, we all are competitive, and we all want to, keep our secrets, because this is our special sauce for what we do. All companies want to have that, no different than a sports team. But if we compare it to a sports team, and we have the hockey NHL finals on right now, if you had a visor that was dangerous to a player, or if you had a helmet that was not doing what it was supposed to do, would we not want every team to have that advantage of having a better helmet, right?
Exactly. Oh, do you want one team
Right.
with this knowledge because they'd had an unfortunate event? Oh, we're going to change it, but we're not going to tell anybody else. That's
100%, and that's where, and part of our role as in our world as the Safety Association for Industry is to try to help people collaborate and be that kind of somebody. When I was up at Banff, they said, you got a pretty cool job. They said you're kind of a connector of people, and I said, yeah, that's a good title for me, a connector of people. And because that's what we're trying to do, is to get this message across.
It's funny you mention that, because I was thinking the same thing. I was thinking you've actually got a really good job. I've set up safety groups in different industries that I've been in, where we meet and we talk. I've set up the Safety Differently Book Club here in Perth. I have this channel. I think, when I look down at the root cause, can't even get away from that language. When I look down as the reasoning why I'm doing all this, is because, a bit like Josh Bryant as well, and other great people here in Australia and around the world, they don't want this knowledge to be stored locally and not shared for everybody's benefit. And that 100%. Doesn't mean industry trade secrets about process or technology or trademarks or patents, and nothing like that. We're talking about the commonality of human beings being hurt at work, and can we prevent that throughout the industry, the particular industry that you're in? Who else can learn from this? And I think that's that's what makes your job. And I was actually thinking, I don't know whether we have anything similar to what you do here in Australia. I don't think we have these institutions, safety institutions in particular.
I think there is one group with your offshore, mostly services your offshore environment, and that's the Safer Together group. And have a look for their website, Safer Together. They're industry led, and I've had some conversation with the group, and they're doing lots of good work in your area as well. And so that might be somebody there that is one of the staff members that you could get on and learn a little bit more about how they're working in the oil and gas industry, especially in the offshore. And the one thing I didn't mention too was that another portion of our work is with our offshore environment in off Newfoundland in Nova Scotia, and this is roughly 300 kilometers offshore where these folks are working in the North Atlantic. The weather is horrible. The waves are intense. It's you know from moving from England and being in the North Sea area, and the background of what Scotland and Piper Alpha and all these things, and we have quite a history on the east coast of Canada, and it's such a pleasure when you go out there to talk with folks on that side of the world. I don't have to do much convincing to get people's attention when we're talking about critical work and critical risk. When you're working offshore and they're going out in helicopters every day, or they're going out in vessels in all weather, everything they do has a critical aspect to it, and also has a potential for an intolerable outcome. And they had, a number of years ago now, they had the Cougar helicopter crash, and I think it was 15 out of 16 employees died in that crash. They had a seizing of the rotor and crashed in the ocean. We had the Ocean Ranger way back, I think it was in 1983, and we lost 87 or 89, I think it was 87, when the Ocean Ranger capsized. And I remember I was a young guy, and it was, that was the worst disaster in 100 years in Canada. And these things have a tremendous impact on communities and every worker.
I still remember, I was at primary school, so I was under 10 years old, north of England, and I was probably around 6 or something like that. I still remember being sat in assembly and having the teacher come in and telling us that this hyper alpha incident, which didn't mean anything to us, had happened, and that I think they came in and they took a couple of children out of assembly because they knew their parents had been involved and weren't sure whether they were still alive or not. And it was one of those moments, as a young kid, and you think, wow. And then when you get to obviously see the news afterwards and talk to your parents about it, and you see the images, and it's definitely something that sticks with you. It
does. And that's, to me, David, that's what drives our work. I look at it, we're an extension of we're part of the caring community. We're like nurses or doctors or people who work in seniors' homes looking after our elderly. We're part of a caring community. We just do it in a bit of a different way. And it's vitally important. At the 25th anniversary of Westray, I was in Nova Scotia, and I was at the event, and we went for we had a little tea and sandwich thing afterwards in the local community hall there. And this young lady was there, and she introduced herself. And I had worked with her dad underground at Westray, and her dad was one of the 26. And she said, "So you knew my dad?" And I said, "I didn't know him very well, but I said he was a very nice guy to work with, and he had a great personality, and he was really a funny character." And you see this big smile come across her face, and she was just so happy to have met. There was a number of guys that were there that had worked with her dad.
Yeah, and that connection back to her loss.
Absolutely. And that's the power of the work that we do. And it's the thing that kind of drives me in my role and what we do at Energy Safety Canada. I am absolutely blessed to have a company and with a board of directors and a strong executive team that understand what our vision is and where we can have an impact for every single worker that's out there. If there's one person that doesn't end up with a life-altering injury or, God forbid, lose their life, these are the things that that have to drive us to be better. And the oil and gas industry, the energy industry, the utility industry, and our industrial construction, and the people, I've met so many people over the last 4.5 years. It's renewed my vision for the work that we do. But going down to Boulder, Colorado 4 times a year to meet with a research group, and everybody that's in that room wants the same thing, is to lessen serious injuries and eliminate fatalities, right? We don't want to be losing anybody on a job site. And wherever
it's that whole Pareto thing as well, isn't it? Let's invest 80% of our resources into the 20% of the fatalities and serious injuries, because that's really where we're going to make the biggest difference. Stubbed toes and even broken fingers generally don't kill people. What kills people? Let's identify that and let's stop that. Let's put our effort into those areas.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And one thing I did want to say about the creative sentencing too, it goes beyond the safety associations. It also goes to some of the universities. So the University of Alberta is working on a couple of creative sentencing as we speak. So they're doing good work in that area as well. And then there's also other. We have a STARS Air ambulance that flies critically ill patients, whether they're work related or not. they will often get an award as well as part of a creative sentence. And
Yeah, right.
most people are, you never know when you could have a health event that you might need that care, whether it's a
Exactly.
motor vehicle incident or something. So lots of good work there in that area. And
Certainly, isn't it? That sounds like
yeah.
an area that sounds again like, very similar to our enforceable undertakings. The universities generally get involved as well, and they start figuring out, by working with the organization, what would a proper evidence-based approach to this look like, and how would we be able to do that. And they generally work with the universities as well over here to help with finding the evidence, finding out what works, what doesn't work, and then actually starting to roll that out as well. So that's a very that's an area that's also very much aligned. But Gordon, I could sit down and talk with you all day. I think I mentioned this when we first talked. I find you a very friendly and very approachable person, and I very much appreciate the time and the effort that you put, not just into your job and what you do, and which I'm quite envious about, to be honest with you. It sounds like a great thing to be involved with, but also the time you spend on, coming onto things like this and sharing your website, the information, the knowledge that you've got on there, the stories that you've got, and just all these new initiatives and all these ideas that you're coming up with, both you and your colleagues as well, and how you're connecting dots, I think is a great way of looking at it. All around the world, how can we connect these dots and share this knowledge and make it a global network of safety as well? I think that's an amazing thing that you're involved in. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing that story with us. It's fascinating, and I'd personally love to have you back on again in the future to talk about other areas, but we can talk about that offline. But thank you so much again for your time.
Yeah, thank you, David. And it's always wonderful to have an opportunity, and also to thank those people. And you've had some other guests on, like Dr. Tristan Casey, and we've done some work together. He's really helped us with our one of our courses that we've delivered, and he and Kim Bancroft delivered those together. Lots of good people around the world have really collaborated to help us progress this forward. So. Thank you for having me on, and keep up the good work and doing some of these recordings. I've enjoyed some of the other presenters.
Thank you again for that. Thank you very much for the kind words. If you could hang around for just a moment, just while I say goodbye, and then I'll come back and see you soon. But thank you again. Okay, everybody, there we have Gordon Walsh, Energy Safety Canada. I'm going to be putting a lot of links in the description below. There's going to be a link to the Energy Safety Canada website, as I mentioned. He's also very graciously said we can have his email address on there as well. So if you need to reach out and contact him to ask him anything to do with the website, the sharing events, I mean, there was so much in that talk. I'm sure he'd be more than willing to help you with whatever you need in there as well. So I think this is the longest one we've had so far. What was it? An hour and a half or something so far, an hour and 32, which there's so much information in there, but hopefully we'll get him back on again in the future and we can cover some different areas. But thank you again for watching and listening, and look forward to seeing you next time.